Welcome to this explainer. We're diving right into the complex and, honestly, incredibly critical world of reporting greenhouse gas emissions for financial institutions. If you're working in finance, sustainability, or you're just curious about how global capital really impacts our climate, you are in the exact right place. We're going to decode the frameworks that are literally transforming how banks and investors measure their true environmental footprint.
Okay, let's set the stakes right out of the gate with a quote from the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials. For a financial institution, your biggest climate impact, it's not the electricity keeping the lights on at headquarters. It's not even the business flights your executives take. It's the money you lend and the capital you invest. Calculating this impact, your financed emissions, is a massive undertaking, but it is absolutely crucial for effective risk management today.
So here's our roadmap for today. We'll hit the Financed Emissions Challenge, Scope 3 Category 15, the 4 types of investments, the steps to calculate emissions, project-specific versus average data, and finally, mastering your climate impact.
Part 1, the Financed Emissions Challenge.
For a long time, tracking this was kind of all over the place. Historically, everyone just did it differently. But today, thanks to industry-led initiatives like PCAF, we have a harmonized global standard. By definition, financed emissions are the annual corporate accounting and disclosure of greenhouse gas emissions financed by your loans and investments at a fixed point in time. Simply put, it's all about following the money to uncover the exact carbon footprint it generates. So, where does this actually live in the official global rulebook? To find out where these emissions sit in standard accounting frameworks, you've got to look for the number 15. Specifically, Category 15 of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol's Corporate Value Chain Standard.
Which brings us to Section 2, Scope 3, Category 15. This visual is a brilliant snapshot of the entire value chain, with the reporting company right there in the middle. Notice how investments are positioned all the way to the right as a Scope 3 indirect downstream activity. Providing capital is basically considered a service provided by the financial institution, which pushes the resulting emissions downstream.
But what does that mean in simple terms? Well, it means that when you invest in a company, their direct emissions from burning fuel and their indirect emissions from the electricity they buy, so their Scope 1 and Scope 2, effectively become your Scope 3 emissions. You own a piece of the company, so you own a piece of their carbon footprint. All right, Section 3, 4 types of investments.
Before we list them out, think about your own organization's balance sheet for a second. Where's the money actually flowing? Are all financial assets treated exactly the same? Short answer is no. We have to categorize them to calculate them accurately. The GHG protocol divides financial investments into these 4 core buckets. First, we have equity investments. That's using your own capital to buy stakes in subsidiaries or joint ventures. Second is debt investments, like corporate bonds or commercial loans. Third, project finance. This is your long-term financing for specific infrastructure projects. Think building a solar farm or a gas-fired power plant. And fourth, managed investments and client services. Categorizing your portfolio into these 4 buckets makes sure we capture the whole shebang accurately.
Moving right along to Section 4, Steps to Calculate Emissions. Now this is where we turn some pretty dense regulatory rules into simple, actionable math. It really just boils down to 4 sequential steps. First, pick a fixed point in time, say December 31st, because as we know, investment portfolios change daily. Second, figure out your proportional share. What exact percentage of the company or project do you actually finance? Third, collect the actual emissions data of the company or project. And fourth, just multiply your share by their emissions. That's it. It ensures you're only accounting for the exact piece of the pie you're responsible for.
To put that into perspective, let's look at how straightforward this math can be. Let's say you hold a 40% equity share in a subsidiary. In that case, you're responsible for exactly 40% of their Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions for that reporting year. So if they emit 100,000 tons of carbon, your financed emissions for that asset are exactly 40,000 tons. It's highly, highly proportional.
Which tees up Section 5 perfectly. Project-specific versus average data.
Now, that third step we just talked about, it relies entirely on the quality of data you can get your hands on. It's a classic head-to-head here. On the left, we have the project-specific method. This is the absolute gold standard. It uses actual Scope 1 and 2 emissions data collected directly from the investee. On the right, the average data method. If you just can't get actual data, you use economic activity, like revenue or total project cost, and multiply it by an environmentally extended input-output, or EIO, emission factor. It relies on industry estimates and really should be used mostly as an initial screening tool to flag the highest emitting sectors in your portfolio.
You'll notice a stark difference in that last column. If you have project-specific data, you don't need secondary emission factors because you already have the real, actual carbon numbers. But if you're forced to use the average data method, you absolutely have to rely on official statistical EEIO tables. For instance, if you financed a manufacturing facility but don't have its carbon data, you'd take the dollar amount of your investment and multiply it by a sector average emission factor for non-residential manufacturing construction. It bridges the gap when perfect data is missing.
Finally, Section 6, Mastering Your Climate Impact.
Because look, accurately calculating your Category 15 financed emissions isn't just some compliance hoop to jump through for the sustainability team. It's an absolute business imperative. It gives you a robust risk assessment, helping you spot emissions-intensive sectors that might be vulnerable in a transitioning economy. It allows for transparent global disclosure that aligns with frameworks like CDP. And ultimately, it empowers your institution with confident decision-making, really future-proofing your entire portfolio.
I'm going to leave you with this thought to chew on regarding your own investments. You track every single cent of financial return, right? But are you tracking the climate impact just as closely? Understanding financed emissions is no longer optional. It's practically the new standard of financial literacy. Thanks so much for joining this explainer, and I really hope this gave you the clarity you need to tackle this crucial topic.